Gracious God, Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us together once again in this place. We lift up Jonathan today and just grateful for his wisdom, the work he puts in, and all that he gives us. Bless him and bless us today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, last time we left off with Jacob settling in Canaan. He'd returned from 20 years in Paddan Aram with his uncle Laban, only to learn his brother Esau, from whom he'd stolen the birthright blessing, was on his way to meet him, accompanied by 400 men. There was also a mention of the death of Isaac and his burial by Esau and Jacob. We begin today with a highly abridged version of the Joseph story. Joseph, the 11th of Jacob's 12 sons, and his first son by Rachel, his favorite wife, was beloved of Jacob, but Joseph had some annoying characteristics. The first reading relies on our already knowing one of these and fills us in on the other. At least as a young man, he was only 17 in today's first reading, Joseph appears to have had a highly developed sense of youthful justice and was, as a result, all too willing to judge. He was a tattletale, as the first reading will show. However, he also had vivid dreams, visions, that he brazenly shared with his brothers and his father. In one dream, he and his brothers were binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly his sheaf stood upright, and his brothers' sheaves bowed down to it. In a second dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars, possibly zodiacal constellations are meant, were bowing down to him. The brothers and Jacob took this to mean that Joseph had dreamed that he was to rule over them, parents and siblings, and receive their deference. The brothers couldn't stand the little creep. Jacob rebuked him for sharing the dreams, but kept the matter in mind. And that brings us to the first reading. Joseph is with Jacob, at home outside Hebron, and the other brothers are away.
A reading from the book of Genesis. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring back word to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with the sleeves that he wore, And they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. The word of the Lord.
If you have biggish chunks of the King James Version of the Bible in your head, or if your only exposure to the Joseph story is the Tim Rice, Andrew Lloyd Webber musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the description of Joseph's robe that led off the reading may sound off. The Hebrew text calls it a long robe with sleeves, but the Septuagint, the 3rd century BCE Greek translation of the Old Testament, turned it into a many-colored or dappled robe. Why, I don't know, but I'm still looking. And the King James Version seems to have used the Greek rather than the Hebrew text here. Again, I have no idea why. Newer English translations, the NRSV, or New Revised Standard Version, the REB, or Revised English Bible, and the JPSV, or Jewish Publication Society version, all use other terms, and some even indicate that the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. The handout goes into a bit more detail and has translations in parallel for you. Now, there are some inconsistencies in the account of Joseph's abduction here. The traders are first Midianites, and then Ishmaelites, and then Midianites again. And first Reuben, and then Judah stands up rather feebly for Joseph. This just hints that multiple stories were merged. Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he was sold as a slave to Potiphar, Pharaoh's commander of the guard. Note that the Pharaoh is never named. He's just Pharaoh. God was with young Joseph, and he quickly rose to a position of authority in Potiphar's house. However, Joseph, a handsome lad, caught the eye of Potiphar's wife, who wanted to bed him. She persisted, and one day when no one else was in the house, grabbed hold of Joseph's garment, and Joseph pulled free and ran outside, leaving his garment behind. When Potiphar returned, the wife claimed that Joseph tried to seduce her, a Hebrew, to insult us, and that when she screamed, he fled, leaving his garment. So Potiphar had Joseph put into the prison for the king's prisoners. Again, the Lord was with Joseph, and the chief jailer was sufficiently impressed that he turned over care of the other prisoners to Joseph. When 2 officers, Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker, were put into prison, the jailer made Joseph a sort of orderly to them. One night, both the cupbearer and the chief baker had dreams. The next morning, Joseph saw that they were troubled. "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We've had dreams and there's no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the cupbearer told Joseph his dream, and Joseph said that the cupbearer would be restored to his post in 3 days' time, and asked the cupbearer to mention him to Pharaoh. The baker, encouraged by this favorable interpretation, told his dream, only to learn that he would be executed in 3 days' time. Both predictions came true, but the cupbearer failed to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. 2 years later, Pharaoh had 2 dreams. In the morning, troubled, he asked his magicians and wise men to interpret them, but they were unable to do so. The cupbearer belatedly remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him. Pharaoh summoned him, and after a quick wash and brush up, Joseph appeared and interpreted the dreams. In fact, he said, the dreams were actually a single dream, and the doubling up simply meant that God was determined to bring them to fulfillment, and quickly. The interpretation was that there would be 7 years of plentiful harvests, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to appoint overseers to take 1/5 of the harvest in the 7 plentiful years, store them up, then dole them out during the 7 years of famine. Pharaoh immediately decided that Joseph was the man for the job and gave him immense authority to carry out the plan. He also gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of the town of On, about 15 miles down the Nile from Memphis. Joseph was only 30 years old at the time, and he diligently carried out his charge. During the 7 years of plenty, Asenath bore him 2 sons, Manasseh, which means making to forget, and Ephraim, which means to be fruitful. The 7 years of plenty ended, and the 7 years of famine began in every country. But thanks to Pharaoh's dream and Joseph's interpretation, Egypt had grain. The people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and he told them to go to Joseph, who opened the storehouses and sold them grain, and sold to all the world when it was known that Egypt had grain. Back in Canaan, Jacob and his sons were not immune to the famine. He sent 10 of his sons, all save Benjamin, his youngest, to Egypt to buy food. They did so and didn't recognize Joseph, but he recognized them. He played some mind games with them, accusing them of being spies and putting them in the slammer for 3 days, trying to purge the evil from their hearts. First, Joseph told them to send one of their number back to Canaan for their other brother, while the other 9 remained in prison. And then he relented and kept one, Simeon, and sent the other 9 back. They were told never to show their faces again unless they brought their youngest brother along. On their return to Canaan, the brothers were astonished and terrified to find their money back in the top of their sacks. When the food ran out, Jacob wanted the 9, remember Simeon was a hostage, to go back to Egypt for more. His sons had a hard time convincing him to let Benjamin come along. The requirement Joseph had laid on them on their first visit, but the logic of send Benjamin and get food, keep Benjamin home and starve, proved overpowering. And Joseph again played more mind games, the primary one being, again, to put the men's money back in their sacks, but also to have his own silver cup put into Benjamin's sack. Shortly after the brothers left, with Simeon among their number, Joseph had his steward chase after them, accuse the brothers of theft when the cup was found, and insist on the perpetrator, Benjamin, being kept as Joseph's slave. Over 20 years previously, the brothers callously sold Joseph to traders and tried to cover it up. This time, they stood up for Benjamin and offered one of themselves in Benjamin's place. And we reach the second lesson.
A reading from the book of Genesis. Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here." Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. In fact, Pharaoh told the brothers to bring their father and their households and live in the best of the land of Egypt, offering wagons to carry Jacob and the children. The brothers quickly did as they had been bidden. Jacob was overjoyed to learn that Joseph was actually still alive and that Benjamin, Joseph's only brother, full brother, was safe. Said, "Land of Goshen's ours from Pharaoh's open hand." So they loaded up the wagons and they moved to Egypt land. Crocodiles, pyramids. In Genesis chapter 46, there's an enumeration of Jacob's household who ended up in Egypt. Particularly interesting because it names 2 of Jacob's female descendants along with 70 male family. Dinah, Jacob's daughter by Leah, whom we encountered last time, and Sarah, S-E-R-A-H, not S-A-R-A-H, daughter of Asher, Jacob's number 8 son. I really wonder what they did that made them important enough to be in this list. Jacob and his family lived well in Egypt. When Jacob died in Egypt at 147, Joseph had his father embalmed, a 40-day process, and the Egyptians wept for Jacob for 70 days. Pharaoh sent Joseph and Pharaoh's servants to Canaan to bury Jacob in the cave in the field at Machpelah, alongside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. I need to talk again about Jacob's age in the final forum. I have some time. But the brothers were concerned. Now that Jacob was dead, Joseph might stop playing nice with them and retaliate for the wrong they did to him back when he was 17. So they humbly apologized and told Joseph that Jacob had asked Joseph to forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you, which brought Joseph to tears. Joseph's reply was, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear." Joseph lived to be 110. He made the Israelites swear to carry his bones back to Canaan when God finally came to bring them back to the land that God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so ends the Joseph story and the book of Genesis. Now, one might wonder how a slave could have risen to a position of power in Egypt. Your handout has a half page on a stratum of society called Habiru, not an ethnic, but a political economic group who were not citizens and sold themselves for day labor, hired out as mercenaries, were impressed into labor on public works, or sometimes turned to banditry. However, at various times, capable Habiru might actually rise to a position of leadership. Joseph, sold as a slave, could easily be considered Habiru, but thanks to the favor of the Lord, also showed immense potential and apparently rose to great heights. The Hyksos were foreigners who ruled Lower Egypt from about 1650 to 1550 BCE. If the date of the Exodus is really about 1280 BCE, and the stay in Egypt was really about 400 years, then this is about the time Jacob went to Egypt. The Hyksos were possibly from the northern Levant, certainly not ethnic Egyptian. This may also help explain why Joseph could rise to a position of authority, not being ethnically Egyptian wouldn't count against him, and why his family could find favor. They may have been shirt-tail relations. After about a century, the ruler of Upper Egypt drove the Hyksos out of Lower Egypt, and a never again policy seems to have taken root. Never again should a foreigner rule Egypt. Let's listen to the third lesson, Proper 16, which talks about a new Pharaoh.
A reading from the book of Exodus. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses, for Pharaoh, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed upon them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Sifra and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill them. If it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live." Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could no longer, she got a papyrus basket and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. Her sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of the Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because I drew him out of the water. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Lo, how the mighty are fallen. Those who once lived on the fat of the land now toiled for others. The lection explains the name Moses, which is Moshe in Hebrew, as having something to do with drawing the infant out of the water. Masha is Hebrew for to draw out, except that that's a folk etymology. Pharaoh's daughter called him Moses in Egyptian, where it means to beget a child. Compare the names of 3 pharaohs: Ramses or Ra-Moses, Ra has begotten a child; Thutmose, born of the god Thoth; Ahmose, Yah, the moon, is born. So the book of Exodus begins with holy disobedience. The opening story is all the more revolutionary because it focuses on women in a patriarchal society. and one could argue a patriarchal book. This argues for the historicity, the accuracy of the story. There are 5 women involved. Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives. Are they midwives to the Hebrews or midwives who are Hebrews? We're not told, but if they're Hebrew, their names mean splendid or a royal pavilion, and to glitter or brilliancy. They're given a direct order to kill male Hebrew peasant children, and they defy it, giving a humorous excuse. Plausible deniability is maintained. Jochebed, Moses' mother, decides to defy Pharaoh too. The lesson said she put the as yet unnamed child into a teva, here translated papyrus basket. But this word is used in only 2 contexts in the Old Testament. 2 times here in Moses' birth story, and 26 times in the story of the flood, where it's translated ark. This is not just a basket, it's something which is going to preserve life for a lot of people. There's Miriam, Moses' sister, whom I'd guess to be 5 or 6 at this point. She's dragged into the disobedience by Jochebed, but she seemed to require very little coaxing. And the peasant disobedience breeds disobedience at the highest level. Pharaoh's unnamed daughter is touched by social holiness and enters the conspiracy. Knowing what she's doing, she saves the baby. The great miracle of Exodus is here, yet it's no miracle. Ordinary women do the right thing, namely to save the weak and the poor. God uses them, not the mighty. We can say that the holy justice of God may require holy disobedience. The child grew up, and the next story, not part of the lectionary, begins one day after Moses had grown up. He went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. Note that Moses, brought up in Pharaoh's household, still felt that the Israelites were his people. But at Pharaoh's wrath, Moses fled and settled in the land of Midian on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. The priest of Midian, called in various places Reuel, Jethro, and Hobab, so we may have multiple traditions in play, gave Zipporah, one of his 7 daughters, to Moses as wife. Moses settled down to life as a shepherd, and we come to the 4th lesson, wherein Moses' life took on a dramatic change.
Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight, and why the bush is not burned out. When the Lord saw that he had turned to see God, he called him out of the bush. Moses, Moses, and he said, Here I am. And then God said, Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on the account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Pezerites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them, So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you, that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. But Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and my title for all generations. The word of the Lord.
So God told Moses that he, God, would bring the Israelites out of Egypt, and that he, Moses, would be the physical instrument God used. But the sign that God was the one sending Moses was deferred. It was only after the people had been brought out of Egypt that they would worship God on the mountain, and that was the sign. Moses had to take it on trust, and he spent a considerable amount of time telling God, I'm not the man for the job, ending with, oh my Lord, please send someone else. At this, God got angry and said, stop that. I'll send your older brother Aaron to do the parts of this for which you feel inadequate. Stop sniveling and get on with it. In fact, God arranged for Aaron to meet Moses in the wilderness. The brothers met up and proceeded with the tasks. First, they told the people that their oppression was about to end, and the people believed the brothers. Then the two went to Pharaoh and said, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, so that they may celebrate a festival to me in the wilderness. To which Pharaoh replied, who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Now, I can't help but hear that in Yul Brynner's voice. The Cecil B. DeMille movie of the Ten Commandments made a big impression on me when I was 7. And there was backlash. Pharaoh then said that the people could not take any time off from making mud bricks, but that they'd now have to gather the straw for the bricks themselves. The straw is a binding agent in the bricks. And they had to continue producing bricks at the same rate. When the brick output fell, the Israelite supervisors were beaten and became hostile to Moses and Aaron. The Lord told Moses and Aaron that he'd harden Pharaoh's heart, but that ultimately Pharaoh would permit, no, demand, that the Israelites leave Egypt. The text continues with signs God had told Moses to perform before Pharaoh. Pharaoh's magicians could do the same things, and Pharaoh was unimpressed. Then come 10 plagues that God told Moses he'd inflict on Egypt. The reasoning was that the Israelites needed to go 3 days' journey into the wilderness to worship the Lord, and the plagues would happen if Pharaoh didn't let the people go worship. The telling and formulae are similar, and I'll just summarize the first 9, or maybe I'll just ignore them. I'll run. For most of the plagues, Moses or Aaron said, thus says the Lord, let my people go so that they may worship me. At first, Pharaoh simply refused. Later, he said that he'd let the people go if the Lord would remove the current plague, but then reneged. In the last few plagues, he said that the people could go, but tried to negotiate exactly who might go and refused when told everyone, men, women, children, livestock, must go. Before the 10th and final plague was announced, the Lord gave special instructions to the people. He told them to ask their neighbors for objects of silver and gold, and the neighbors did so. Then the plague was announced. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the female slave who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. To which Pharaoh said, in effect, bring it on. And we come to the fifth lesson, proper 18.
A reading from the book of Exodus. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. If the household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join its closest neighbor in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided in proportion to the number of people who eat of it. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the month. Then the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. It shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the lamb the same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted over the fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. You shall let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until morning you shall burn. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The account continues with another agricultural festival tied to Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The people went through with the Passover rite, slaughtering lambs, painting doorposts and lintels with blood, and eating in haste. And then, at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron midnight and said, "Rise up, go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord, as you said. Take your flocks and your herds, as you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing on me too." The Egyptians urged the Israelites to go, and they left. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, vaguely 20 miles, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. The number is an exaggeration. The time that the Israelites had lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the companies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. There follow more Passover regulations and a commandment from God to consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the Israelites, of human beings and animals, is mine. Now, the most direct way to go from Egypt to Canaan is along, or at least near, the Mediterranean shore through Philistine country, which is an anachronism. God wanted them rather to take a different route through the wilderness, lest they change their minds if they faced war. The Lord went with them, a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, so that they might travel by day and by night. They camped in front of the Red Sea, actually the Sea of Reeds, possibly Lake Timsah, which is up here, or the Little Bitter Lake, which is now, both of those are part of the Suez Canal today. And again, Pharaoh had a change of heart. What have we done, letting Israel leave our service? And he sent out his horses and chariots and army and overtook the Israelites. The people were terrified. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? And God told Moses to get the people on the move, which brings us to today's sixth lesson, Proper 19.
A reading from the book of Exodus. The angel of God, who was going before the Israelite army, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud moved in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. So the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed him into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Then follows in the text the Song of Moses, which is Canticle 8 in the prayer book. It's on page 85 if you want to sneak a peek when you get into church. And then the Song of Miriam. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. Just those two lines. This is probably one of the oldest, very oldest bits in the Bible. They set out into the wilderness of Shur. After 3 days, they found water, but it wasn't potable. So the Lord showed Moses a piece of wood, which, when thrown into the water, purified it. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. And that's where they'll be when we pick up the story 2 weeks from now in the wilderness.